Thanks very much, Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be talking about today's MPI topic, which is about incompetence and breaches of trust which are harming the Australian people. And, friends, this topic reminds me of the first rule of glass houses. Don't throw stones. Because it's a pretty bad week for the Liberals to be talking about trust, and it's a particularly bad week for them to be talking about competence. We had this week, in their own words, in the words of their own ministers, former members of parliament, a litany of confessions about the incompetence and lack of trust that they showed during their term in government. And let me read you some of my favourites, Deputy Speaker. John Alexander, former member for Bennelong, replaced by the terrific current member for Bennelong. And just like the current member for Bennelong, man of great integrity, speaks the truth. And this is what he said on Nemesis, Deputy Speaker. He said, in looking at the 9 years in power and our 3 Prime Ministers, the playing of politics was the number 1 game, the number 2 game and number 3 game. It's not productive and it's not edifying. That's what he said on ABC. And that is right, Deputy Speaker. It's not edifying. It is entertaining, but it is not edifying. And that was a former member of the Liberal Party, former member of this House. That was his take on the competence and the trust of the Liberals. Bridget McKenzie, this is what she had to say in the Nemesis program. She described the period in government from the Liberals and Nationals, and I quote, as an internal war. She said it was like, and I quote again, being strapped to a suicide bomber. Something horrific and catastrophic was going to happen. That was Senator McKenzie. Another testimony on the trust and competence of the Liberals during their time in government. And finally, Malcolm Turnbull. What would he say on this MPI about the trust and competence of the Liberals in government? Well, fortunately we know, because he gave a quote to the Nemesis program. He said, and I quote again, we were treating the government of Australia as a plaything. This is the former leader of the Liberal Party's take on the trust and competence that they displayed.
Gold medal in competence.
Even Christopher Pyne, he had a hot take on the same program. He said, and relevant to the MPI, he described the Dutton plotters as the Keystone Cops.
Wow.
This is a party who, in its own words, given testimony by people in its own ranks, showed a remarkable level of incompetence and lack of trust, condemned by their own statements. And this MPI is about trust and it is about competence. Yep. And how should we judge the trust and competence of this government versus previous governments? Well, there'll be many different ways to do that. Many people will have their own perspective. But one way, as I said just before question time, is to judge governments by the range of metrics that the Liberals would have us judge them themselves. And as I said before question time, just before the election, on the eve of the election, they put out their own list of metrics that they thought reflected their competence. A series of metrics of unemployment, youth unemployment, welfare dependency, income tax. This is what they wanted the Australian public to judge them on. They were so keen on these metrics, they printed 20 million of them and handed them to every single Australian on their way to the polling booth. And going through them on metric after metric, the government that they are complaining about, the Albanese government, has overperformed the metrics that they themselves set down to be judged by. Whether it be unemployment, youth unemployment, welfare dependency, income tax, every single metric this government has performed more strongly than the previous government on their own metrics. And I'll take the point of order on inflation, because the Leader of the Opposition made a big deal of inflation in his rambling speech on this MPI. He said Australia has higher inflation than every other member of the G7. Well, 2 problems with that, friends. First of all, Australia isn't in the G7. You just can't pick whatever group you want to pick.
And time
Secondly,
has
Australia's
expired.